Broadcasting from Orchard Park, New York,
and Boca Raton, Florida,
it's the Freight 360 podcast. From freight broker sales tips to sports talk, this podcast is all about helping you grow as a freight broker. We're your hosts, Nate Cross
and Benjamin Kowalski.
Let's talk freight. All right, welcome back. Take 2 of episode 277 of the Freight Broker, or the Freight 360 podcast. I'm all over the place today. We just started recording a couple of minutes ago. My mic was wrong. But anyway, episode 277. We're going to have a good conversation today about how to have hard conversations, and we'll talk about some news as well with the upcoming inauguration here. But first, make sure to check out all of our other content. Freight360.net is the website. We've got all of our full-length podcasts, videos, clips, blogs. YouTube's a great spot as well for all of our content. Share us with your friends. Leave us comments and questions in the YouTube comments section there, and you can email us as well. There's a contact form around the website. And while you're over there, check out the Freight Broker Basics course if you're looking for a full-length educational piece that we did in conjunction with DAT. There we go. How's the mic sound this time? Is that better?
Crystal clear, buddy.
Boom. Love it. We're going to get into it today. Ben, what's going on down in Florida? Did you guys warm up?
Yeah, but it's chilly again. It was down in the 50s today. So again, relative to you, not freezing, but enough that I had to throw a long sleeve shirt on for a moment or two this morning.
There you go. We're so it's playoff football, and I unfortunately was not able to attend the game last weekend when the Bills hosted the Broncos. I was at drill for the Army. I did catch most of it through my phone, and then I had to rewatch like the highlights, but a nice 31-7 win. Steelers had a different outcome, unfortunately.
It was terrible.
What do you think is what's going to be next for like Mike Tomlin and the team? You know what I think it is like Big Ben, right? You guys were a playoff team for years, and I think it's the quarterback situation right now. Like I feel like Mike Tomlin is such a good coach. He just doesn't have the quarterback he needs right now. Is kind of where I'm looking at it. What do you think?
I agree. I think, obviously Russell Wilson looked great first half of the season, but also like he had some receivers that were playing well early in the season. And then, obviously he got hurt. My mind's blanking on the number one receiver for whatever reason right now. I get pictures.
Pickens?
Yes. So after he got hurt, when he kind of came back, he was hit or miss. And I think Russell Wilson needed a very good receiver to open up other options. Once he wasn't on the field, they just couldn't open up the run as much or even the shorter passes. And I don't think they sign Russell again next year. I think probably Justin Fields maybe ends up being the quarterback. I don't think Justin Fields looked good enough this year to be the solution, even if he might be the only option next year. But I definitely think, again, and like the other stuff they're talking about, like, because I listen to Pittsburgh radio, is like, I think even if they drop Tomlin, which I definitely don't think they will, he would get picked up immediately. Like, he's a very effective coach. I think a lot of the issues maybe seem to be related to coaching, but also, I don't know, it's really hard to draw the line because you don't even know who's responsible. Was it like the new offensive coordinator that was determining who was on the field and who wasn't? There were a lot of, I think, bad decisions and play calls related to like who was literally in the game for some of these plays that were called. And it was like, hey, was that Tomlin's call? Was it, I think it's Arthur Smith, was it his call? So there's so many unknowns as to, I think, what caused it. But I think at the end of the day, you haven't won a playoff game since 2016. And Tomlin has this saying that he says over and over again, the standard is the standard. And the standard is not just to win regular season games. And they were saying this morning, listen, these are your words. And guess what? All of the fans are holding you to the standard you said you held everyone to, and you failed to meet it by a long shot. So something needs to be changing. And I think they tried to switch things up this year, to his defense. I mean, brought in 2 quarterbacks. They definitely seemed to make some bets that other teams weren't willing to make that happen. I don't think Russell Wilson either had the tools or is getting too old to be able to do that over the long run. He played great early and just didn't peak at the right time, possibly.
Here's I think, the issue I struggle with on the quarterback side for you guys is every year you're good enough that you're not going to get a high draft pick.
Yes.
But you're not getting far enough. You know what I mean? Like
Here's the argument, though. Here's what I heard. So the guy, Pittsburgh that does Pittsburgh sports every day forever was saying, he was like, they were arguing that same point. He named, and I don't follow the NFL well enough to know what they were, but he named like 4 or 5 really good quarterbacks that were picked very low in the draft that
Tom
you
Brady,
didn't need.
round 6.
Yeah. But even I think
Brock Purdy was Mr. Irrelevant.
there were like, he named like 3 or 4 that were picked way down in the draft, or like, were picked up late and you didn't need the high draft pick to get it. His point was, you need to put the effort into the scouting to get that person. And he didn't feel the Steelers were putting enough effort to finding them and picking through what other options weren't just the, top 3 picks every year. You got it.
Yep.
But it's a valid point. I mean, I think that's a lot of what I've always felt is like, they're good enough in the regular season. They don't get great draft picks, so they're never really getting up there to get them. And
yeah, who knows, man? We'll see what happens. But we're entering divisional round this weekend. Chiefs hosting the Texans, Bills hosting the Ravens. I'll be at that game. It's supposed to be like single digits. And I'm going to say something that I don't want to jinx anything here, but I have not seen the Bills. Have I? Wait, I could be wrong here. So I haven't seen the Bills lose at home since before COVID. But I actually might have been to a losing game in the last year, because I feel like I said that and I broke the curse. But anyway, it's gonna be a tight game. Baltimore's favored by a point on the road, so that's
I like the Bills.
What's that?
I said I like the Bills in that one.
Is that just because the Steelers lost to the Ravens last week? No, I do too. I think there's like the PTSD that Bills have of like earlier on this season when the Ravens came, or the Bills went to M&T Bank Stadium in Baltimore and just got like steamrolled. Derrick Henry, like opening play of the game, ran for like 90 yards for a touchdown. The dude's a tank. But we had like a super unhealthy defense at the time. We got Matt Milano back as a linebacker, and he's, that dude's a stud. So we'll see. Obviously I'm going to pick the Bills because they're my team, but it's going to be a tough game. It really will be. I think it's going to be a matter of, can the Bills fire off on all caliber, can they just go off, right? Like defense, offense, special teams, can they get takeaways, not turn the ball over, etc. On the NFC side, you got the Eagles hosting the Rams. That'll be a good one to watch as well. The Rams are looking really good right now, but Philly's at home. They got a 5.5 point spread in their favor there. And then you got the Lions hosting the the Commanders. They're always the Redskins in my mind, but it should be interesting.
In other sports, did you? I watched the TGL last night, the indoor golf league that they just launched. It was
really
pretty interesting.
Like simulators?
So they built a huge facility just north of me, and so it was on the local news. And I know they were talking about it, but like Tiger played last night, so it's like 3 guys versus 3 guys. I think there's 8 teams in total. The Palm Beach team, or the Jupiter team, played the LA team. Tiger's team got spanked by the LA team. Justin Rose, Morikawa, and I can't remember who the third guy was. Sahith Theegala, I think, was the third guy on the LA team. But it was pretty cool because it's a simulator, right? And then there's 2 tee boxes. So based on where you are on your shot, you're either close to the screen or far from the screen. They hit off real grass. When they hit the rough, they drop the ball in a patch of fairway. It looks like a driving range. And then there's sand. So there's like 3 things in each line: sand, fairway, and rough. And then once they hit the approach shot, like, it goes into the screen, but then there's a red light that lights up on the real green that is behind them. So it's a big stadium and the fans are super close. All the players are mic'd, which was cool. So they're playing music. It was kind of like an NBA game, right? Yeah. Vibe, with like very close fans into the action. And then a red light drops on the green to show them where the ball should be based on what the simulator put the ball on the real green. And then they play around the real green, and then the hole moves literally on the real green that has rough and a sand trap next to it.
I'm looking at pictures, man.
So it's pretty cool.
My winter simulator league starts next Monday, and I'm like really excited because I haven't played in a few months. and I'm seeing pictures of this TGL, and now I'm like just kind of getting my dreams crushed. I'm like, I'm going to play on a track, man.
It was cool,
And this
honestly.
thing looks pretty sweet.
Yeah, like the things they were saying is like obviously chipping out of the fake grass was very different because you couldn't get the right spin. So like they were really having to change the game. But there was a shot clock. So the whole thing I think was an hour, maybe an hour and a half. Like it's a very fast pace. It was like 3 versus 3 for the first 9 holes. Then they play one guy versus one guy for like the next set of holes. And then like through the season. I mean, it was pretty cool. Like it was definitely different. It was not like watching real golf.
Yeah.
And there were definitely shots that I don't think the simulator was accurate on. Like there was a couple balls that like literally hit the sand and kind of rolled out. And they're like, yes. I think that somebody was like, yeah, that was Tiger Woods 2000 golf where like you hit a bunker and the ball rolled up onto the green. But
Yeah.
again, it was something different and something pretty cool to watch. I thought it was pretty entertaining.
I like it. Well, let's go. Let's take a look at the news here for freight and transportation. So, Supreme Court, if you remember the TQL liability case from a while back with a crash where someone was killed. So this now for the third time, the Supreme Court is declining to address that broker liability issue. So they're not taking it up on their level. I didn't realize this is the third time. I remember like once, but we've had like, I feel like C.H. Robinson had one recently.
I think Werner was one. CH
Global Trans, maybe.
Yeah.
Anyway, so yeah, but I think the precedent there is good because by definition, as freight brokers, we are intermediaries, right? We cannot control what that driver does. We can vet the carrier. That's about as far as we can go, is to vet them and do our due diligence there. But as far as like selecting the driver and controlling what that driver does, that's out of our purview.
We don't even have any influence over it. You can't. Yeah. We don't even have the industry doesn't have visibility into the driver level, even with ELDs, to know what driver's experience is put on any individual. Right? That's correct. Yeah. And even there, it's somewhat. You can and can't. Like, there's some things you can see, but there's subjective things you couldn't see if you were, a trucking company hiring them. I've never been able to see
a driver's motor vehicle record.
No, and I looked into that for a couple of tech companies where I like did a dive on it, and like you've got to pay for that. Like it is like held through the FMCSA. You've got to pay to get that report, and I believe the driver has to sign off on the trucking company getting that report for obviously like I don't know. Confidentiality reasons. Yeah. Like you can't just access the database of an individual driver's record.
Yeah. Other news, supply chain trends to watch in 2025. And you guys can get a recap of all the news in our newsletter if you sign up at freight360.net. It goes out every Tuesday and Thursday. Big things to look out for this year. Obviously, the inauguration of Donald Trump is going to be on the 20th. So that's Monday of next week. Hot topics to look out for there is potential rising tariffs, geopolitical tensions. Now, here's something that my boss made he made a cautionary comment that I think is very valid, and I think it's obvious to anybody that like follows the economy and follows news at a high level. But you get a lot of like young people that just think like, oh, Trump's back, it's going to be a great economy and a great freight market, and the reality is the short term. If you raise tariffs, like the short term could lead to like a short-term weakened economy. Like you could define that numerous ways, but increased inflation, you could have a slowing market, possible mini recession in there. You might have longer, based on how policies are changed, you might have some long-term improvement, but the short term, it might be a tough beginning of 2025. What do you think?
Yes, because I think there's a lot of conflating what can and can't be done to influence and not influence certain things, right? The thing that I was reading going into this year that I think lots of folks overlook when they think that any administration could change anything that much related to business, right, is two things. It is the cost of money, which the Treasury has some influence over with interest rates. But also what I think people don't necessarily understand.
Not the president, the Treasury Department does.
Correct. And not only that, and there's some influence over that in some ways. However, like those are not real interest rates. And I also don't think everyone understands what that means. because the Treasury Department can change what the Fed, right, is charging other banks to borrow money, like the overnight rate.
Yep.
However, what actually determines like your mortgage rate or your
bond
your
market,
ability to
isn't it?
borrow money, it's a free trading market. So everybody in the world that either buys treasury bonds determines the risk of the US government to pay it, and they either buy more of them or less than. That market
There tends to be a
falls.
correlation, but it's not directly tied to it.
It is
Yeah.
not. And
Yeah.
like again, earlier this year in the real estate market, like rates dropped, but real interest rates did not. And they call
Yeah.
it like the inverted yield curve because the short-term bonds were paying more interest than long-term bonds, which shouldn't happen. Like you should get more money if you lock it up longer than if you lock it up shorter. But the risk and what they felt because of our budget getting blown up. Like we're spending so much money that the amount of money it costs to service that debt is skyrocketing. So the US government is becoming a riskier bet for other countries to invest in those bills. So just because that rate went down didn't mean you got a cheaper commercial mortgage or that your mortgage for your house got cheaper or that your credit cards went down. Or for the most part, that your businesses could borrow money cheaper to have more inventory, to have more goods that we all ship, right?
Yeah.
And the big difference is going to be what inflation looks like because the recent jobs report was expected to be like 165,000 new jobs, and it was like 250,000. And when there are more jobs being created, that is the number one indicator that the Fed looks at to drop interest rates. Because when people can't find work, that's when they bring them down to stimulate the economy so that everybody can go get a job and survive. But when there's lots of jobs being created and interest rates are high, the Fed doesn't drop interest rates. And that's really what we need to happen. We need inflation to come down first, and then interest rates fall. Then the economy starts to grow again. But that retraction and contraction is being elongated because of COVID and what happened during then. And it's just taking far longer to work out than anyone expected. And no matter what administration you put in there, they're not really going to be able to influence the prices that individual companies charge for individual goods, from widgets to cars to refrigerators to hats to anything else we buy. And those are really the things that determine how quickly a thing grows or shrinks, right?
Yeah.
So
let's look at freight brokerages the last couple of years. And a lot of this comes from Brush Pass Research, Kevin Hill, shout out. His recent, this is from about a week ago, I want to say. In 2024, roughly 3,100 fewer brokerages than the previous year. So that's how many net we lost. And that adds on to the about 2,400 net loss from 2023. You've got about 5,500 exits since January of 2022. So there were 25,000 new MCs launched between 2020 and 2022. So that, we had that massive growth, and then we've had it kind of tapering off. So we're still at the compound annual growth was still about 3.5% annually. So that's I think a healthy growth trend overall. But we had that, like, if you zoom in to those like recent years, it was crazy, and we all remember it, right? The post shutdown era when just like everybody got into it and it started to taper off. So I'm optimistic about 2025. So so weird, man. Do you remember like the end of 2023 and we were like, all right, 2024 is going to be like a great year, and like we got through it. I'm just like, I'm like burnt out. So whatever. Anyway, let's talk about how to have some hard conversations here.
yes.
And the reason I wanted to have this talk today is you and I were talking off air beforehand this morning about like just the differences like culturally around the world and even like around the country about how, and this is not like, we can't generalize everybody, but there tends to be like norms in how we communicate depending on where you live and how everyone else around you is. And Northeasterners, for example, tend to talk faster, be less patient, and more just like direct to the point in a lot of cases. Whereas like you go to the West Coast, you go down south, on the whole, generally speaking, it tends to be a little more laissez-faire, a little bit like looser and slower and whatnot. And you go to other countries, and we have a lot of our workforce in the logistics field is offshore, right? You get South America,
Yep.
you get Asia, you get parts of Europe, and it is like night and day for some of these folks. Like I remember
Yes.
I worked with some folks in South America, and it was like if I email somebody, like, well, if somebody emails me, I either respond right away that I'm like, hey, I'm working on it, or I give them an answer. I don't let an email sit for like 2 weeks, or
Correct.
just never respond to it. Like I don't know how some people think that's like acceptable, but like that's just how I operate. But we were talking about it, and it's like sometimes there are hard conversations to have, and if you just like break the ice, call out the elephant in the room on whatever the issue is, and you start that hard conversation, everything after that is easy, or it gets easier. And this is gonna we talk about like customers that aren't paying their invoice, employees that aren't performing at the level that they should, a carrier that's having an issue and it's going to be a delay for your customer, right? These are the things, and I've used the phrase before that we use in the Army is bad news gets worse with time, right? If you don't just deliver the bad news. So
Yeah.
what are your
Two
thoughts?
things too. Like one, I mean, throughout human history, there are cultural differences in communications and manners and protocols that become habits that are different. That's just always been true, right? In fact, the thing I was telling someone else, we were talking about this last week, is like there's a scene in Wolf of Wall Street where this happens, where he goes over to Switzerland to go negotiate
yeah.
a deal, and the guy's like, we have tea first, or it was like tea or coffee. We first need to talk about like, social normities before we do business. And he gets real frustrated, right? He's a stock trader from New York, where he's like, no, like, let's just do this. And he's like, no, you're being rude. We need to do this first. Like, I'm not comfortable doing that until we do this. And you see that conflict and those differences, right? And I think that is absolutely one thing, right? They're the social norms, right? And like kind of the way you just initiate or start something, right? Where like, I think in the Northeast, you are not preferencing, but like you're prioritizing like effectiveness and speed over manners. Where I think in the South, it's more of the manners and hospitality. And then too, not that one is better or worse than the other, they're just different cultural ways of approaching those things. And then I think in the second bucket, you have a fear of actually having difficult conversations. Because when I think of fear, right, like whether it's fear to make a cold call, fear to go meet somebody in a business meeting you've never met, a fear to go speak in public, the solution to that is always action. The more you think about it, the harder it gets. It does not get easier. Like, and in the analogy they use in psychology, like if you are a 10, 11-year-old on a high dive and you want to jump off this high dive for the first time, the longer you stand there, it does not get easier. It's easier if you go and take action and jump. And to your point, once you've jumped, the second time is easy. It's the same reason why cold calling, like you get the momentum, the first call is always the hardest. But once you make that first call and your body gets used to overcoming that fear, the second one gets easier, third, fourth, fifth, and it goes downhill, right? But I think there are lots of folks that have a lot of difficulty related to that fear to having a difficult conversation. And you mentioned the customers, but it's also right, like accountability with employees or staff, right? Where somebody is like a performer as a salesperson, and then you move them into a role where they got people reporting to them. And sometimes there's like incredible hesitancy to any accountability. Just, hey, have you had this conversation with your team? You're telling us that like they're not able to do this thing and this mistake keeps happening. What have you talked to them about? And then we'll hear, oh, well, they should know. It's in the document. It's in their training. We talked about this when we hired them. Why don't they know this, right? And it's like, yes, that is partially true, but like it is your job as a manager and a leader that you need to be able to hold people accountable and remind them of sometimes the difficult things that need to be done. Not just leading and showing, that's part of it. But the other piece is helping, you got to hold people accountable in some ways to doing the things that you expect of them. Because like human nature is people tend to divert to the easiest way forward,
The
and they
path
keep
of least
finding
resistance,
that.
right?
Exactly, the path of least resistance. And sometimes that finds more efficiency. There's nothing wrong with human nature's ability or need to find the path of least resistance. That's survival, right? I'm not going to climb a 40-foot tree to find something to eat if the next day I can find one in a 10-foot tree and the next day find it on the ground. Like, that is survival. However, some things require having those difficult conversations in order to be effective. And again, I just think general accountability from any managers and leaders is one of the harder things for new leaders to do because they don't have that habit. And then they just expect things to be done. And then they get frustrated when they don't get done. And then they get angry and then they resent that person. And now you have conflict and toxic culture within an organization, all going back to the same point of, well, why aren't we having these conversations with our team day in and day out on what the expectations are? Are we calling our drivers to make sure loads are picked up? Well, no, the dispatcher sent me an email. Well, okay, 2 of them didn't get picked up and you didn't find out until after the load was supposed to be picked up.
In freight, time is money and efficiency is key. That's where Levity comes in. Imagine automating your email operations to do more with less effort. Levity connects directly to your inboxes, extracting vital information from emails and attachments in real time. It seamlessly integrates with your TMS, empowering you to quote faster, build loads more efficiently, and book more freight in less time. Whether it's incoming emails from shippers or carriers, Levity's got you covered. It understands any language, any format, and even interprets non-standard formatting. Visit levity.ai today to sign up and get started.
Tired of struggling to find accurate rates and the right carriers for your freight? With DAT1, you can access more than 500 million posted loads and trucks every year. That's 3 times more capacity than any other load board. Plus, their integrated freight management system makes it easy to cover loads 24/7. They have the most trusted network of carriers, brokers, and shippers in the country. You'll get real-time rates on every lane so you know exactly how much a shipment will cost before you commit to it. Plus, you get instant access to top bids from qualified carriers around the country. Get 10% off your first year of DAT1 when you visit the link in the show notes. Well, okay, that's the dispatcher's fault. Well, yes, and that may be true. However, that doesn't mean it's not your responsibility to get ahead of it, to let your customer know long before they expected that truck that he couldn't make it because he was still at his previous delivery, right?
Yep.
And those are just like a few that immediately come to mind.
Yeah, I want to kind of lean in on the service failure part while we're on that note. Is if you have, let's say someone's going to be late, right? And if you try to like avoid the conversation with your shipper, things can snowball negatively, and it could end up way worse for you if you don't get ahead of it.
It almost always does.
Yeah, you think about it. Like we'll play this through as a scenario, right? Let's say. Winter weather. We've had that as a hot topic lately, right? We had a big snows. Well, this whole week we have a big snowstorm here in Western New York, and it's impacted I-90, both westbound and eastbound. It doesn't make a difference. The snow doesn't care which direction you're going, but that means things going east towards Albany, New York City, New England, and stuff going south and west to Pittsburgh, Cincinnati, the Midwest, all that stuff, right? So if you have a truck that gets delayed for, it could be the loading was delayed, they got delayed just in the weather traffic, whatever the case might be. If you don't let your and you can replace the weather thing with any other incident, like a breakdown or whatnot, right? If you don't relay that information to your customer, or the receiver or whatever it's going to be, think about the snowball effect, okay? If they show up 4 hours late, and now they miss their appointment, and they're going to be first come, first serve. And they might roll to the next day, worst case scenario. Think about every other operational piece beyond that point that's going to matter. And it's the carrier and it's the customer, right? So it could be the customer, their customer needs an update on something.
Well, go back a second.
How many hours they have? Go ahead.
Go back to the original piece, right, is that shipper might have people literally staffed there with the load staged, waiting for this driver that they are paying. And if that load doesn't pick up when it was supposed to, they might have to unstage that load, put it back in a warehouse, which the company has to pay for. Those warehouse staff are calling and emailing the logistics person going, what are we doing? We just spent an hour staging this load. Now we got to unstage this and get the next one staged where this one is at right now. That's going to take us twice the amount of time to do this for nothing. Like, what is going on? And then the logistics person goes, I don't know. The broker hasn't emailed me back or answered my phone call. I'm not sure where the truck is. So now they're arguing with each other at your customer, creating your customer, giving them a headache just internally at their company, and then go beyond that.
So very simply, like, how can you approach the conversation? It could sound something like this, like calling, hey, Mr. Customer, hey, I got bad news, but I think we're gonna be able to work through this, right? I start right up front with, all right, this is going to be a hard conversation, but I'm optimistic about how we can work through it. And you could, like, to your example, let's say it's going to be 4 hours late. They've got people that, or let's say it's going to be a day late, right? Let's go like a extreme scenario. Hey, I know this was supposed to get there today. The driver got held up for XYZ reason, whether a breakdown, slow loading, whatever the case might be. I know you guys were expecting to need, people in place, a crane, whatever. I want to make sure that we're not wasting your resources. They're not going to be able to get there until tomorrow, most likely now. Is there any way we can get that rescheduled, right? I'm up front. I call it the elephant in the room. I think one of the things to point out here is, like, we all put our pants on the same way, right? Like, a job is a job. At the end of the day, you can separate business from, like, the emotion and the person that's working in the business, okay? So the person on the other end might just be like, all right, cool, we'll get it rescheduled. Whereas if you don't tell them, and then they've got all these people here waiting, and they have all these costs that end up getting wasted, their boss gets pissed at them, and then they're going to, in turn, have resentment towards you because you didn't give them an update when they could have easily rescheduled or shuffled things around to make it work better. Like we said before, bad news gets worse with time. If you don't just address it up front, it's going to snowball into a worse situation. What do you got?
And that's a really big fear that shippers tell us all the time with working with new brokers is that is an unknown. It's not an unknown that somebody can find them a truck. What they're really worried about is, are you going to tell them and update them when it's difficult to do? That's the thing they're scared about. Correct.
These are external factors.
Right. They're worried they're going to work with a new broker, and the new broker is just going to be too scared to call them or let them know when something doesn't go well. And then they are going to have this whole bunch of things that they've got to either deal with, get yelled at, be responsible for at the end of the day. That person's job is to choose the provider that's going to pick the load up. If it doesn't get picked up, it falls on them because you didn't let them know ahead of time, right? And then the thing that is crazy is that it's like, okay, yes, there are scenarios where, like, that customer absolutely might be upset. They very well might yell at you. They might be like, this is ridiculous. I can't believe this. And it might be because they know they're about to get yelled at and they're scared. They're going to get yelled at. So they take it out on you. And that is just part of business, right? Not everything is going to go perfectly. And that's a legitimate concern going into that phone call. The thing I would say is that in every one of those early in my career, I was terrified to make that phone call. I was scared that they were going to I didn't necessarily care if they yelled at me. That's not really been, like, just me personally a bother. I was worried they were just never going to do business with me again. And I was going to lose all the work, energy, and effort I built into building the relationship, learning this company's supply chain, getting trucks lined up, and all of that was just going to go to zero, was really, like, my fear, right? The thing I learned after doing them, right, was I think almost in 100% of those situations, after I had that conversation, even when I've gotten yelled at, like literally yelled at and been told, like, I don't know if we can work with you anymore. Like, this is ridiculous. I am going to get yelled at by my customer. We might lose business because of this. It's unacceptable. That once that person calmed down, right, sometimes it was in the same conversation. Once they got it out of their system, their demeanor changed and they're like, look, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to get upset at you. I just know I have a lot I'm going to have to deal with because of this. Sometimes it was the next day. Sometimes it was later that day when I spoke to them again. And every single one of them, I ended up with a better relationship with my customer and I ended up with more business. And I think it's for two reasons. One, there's like a saying, it's like it's like, don't tell me, show me, right?
Yeah.
Or like you see somebody's true colors when things get difficult, not when it's easy. Anybody can just be a nice person when everything's easy. You see who somebody is and what they're willing to do when it's difficult to do. And when you do that and you have that conversation and that person realizes, one, that you did it, even though they knew you were likely scared and didn't want to give them the update. Furthermore, when they yell at you, it ends up even better because then that person feels guilty because they know it wasn't your fault. They know you still did it, and they know you took their shit when they yelled at you, that they felt worse about it. And then on the other end, they usually will say, hey, look, man, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to overreact. I appreciate you telling me ahead of time. It did help me save some of the issues I would have had to deal with if I didn't know. What are you working on next week? And like, I've always ended up with more business because that was the fear they had when they started working with me. And once they knew they could trust that I would tell them not just the good news, but also the difficult things, they were willing to give me more business because that's really where their hesitancy was in the first place.
I had this literally happen last week to me where I had to have a hard conversation with somebody and, I kind of approached it with like, here's the issue. I'm going to help you work through it. It's going to cause a little more work, but we're going to get taken care of. And this person was like really pissed. And like I became a verbal punching bag and I'm getting yelled at, yada, yada, yada. I got a phone call the next day and they're like, hey, I'm sorry. I kind of went off on you yesterday. And I was like, it's okay. It's all right. I'm like, we worked through it, but you're absolutely right. Like that's exactly what happens. And I want to kind of pose it this way too. Like if you're turn the tables here, right? If you're afraid to tell your customer bad news, flip it around. Think about the times when your customer has bad news for you, like a slow payment, right? How does it make you feel when you can't get a straight answer out of them? Like,
No,
hey,
checks in the mail.
Yeah,
every week.
Like it's one thing to not tell you anything at all. It's another level to straight up lie to you about it. Like I have, how many times, right, has as a customer been like, oh, checks in the mail, or oh, we might have had the wrong address. I'm going to have to do a stop payment on that check. It's like, that's not true. You've paid us dozens of times before. Literally had one, if you go, this is probably like 10 years ago, we had a lettuce shipper that was like an hour from our office, and we couldn't get updates. We friggin' sent people down to their office and showed up there, and the whole point was like, we're not leaving there until we have a check in our hand. And it ended up, they did pay something to like, show some sort of good faith. But it's like, if you can't just communicate the information, whether it's good or bad.
Have you fallen victim to double brokering, cargo theft, or identity theft? Quickscope stands out as the only load-level fraud protection tool available today. Unlike any other solution on the market, Quickscope is deployed post-agreement between shippers or brokers and carriers. Shippers can rest assured that their cargo remains secure. Brokers can confidently confirm the identity of the individuals on site for pickup, and carriers can trust that they'll receive timely payment. Start your free trial with Quickscope today by visiting them online at quickscope.com. That's QUIKSKOPE.com. Blue Book Services is the resource you need if you're transporting fresh produce or lumber. Their online databases contain thousands of companies throughout the produce and lumber industry supply chains. You can easily search their databases to generate new sales leads. Blue Book's credit ratings help you avoid companies with high credit risk, and their team can help resolve disputed loads. To learn more, go to producebluebook.com or lumberbluebook.com and click Join Today.
That's a big problem there. So, I encourage you to put yourself in that person's shoes, and it's the way you'll feel if you have bad news coming towards you. You'd rather just like have the bad news instead of the uncertainty, right? Like uncertainty will drive you mad. Like if think about the customer, if they're waiting there and they're waiting and the truck's not showing up and you're not giving them straight updates on it, the customer's going to be pissed, and they're going to associate working with you and feeling like that versus like, all right, they just know straight up like it's going to be late. They might have to have a hard conversation with their customer, but this is business. We know things are going to go wrong, but the way that you handle the adverse situations is going to speak volumes way more about your character and the kind of person you are than what the actual situation is. It's that simple.
There's a quote I love about this. It's your success in life is determined by how many difficult conversations you're willing to have. Like you can't do big things. You sure as shit can't start a company and get it to success. You can't grow a company. I don't even think you can have successful personal relationships with other friends or even in a marriage or with your children. I don't think there's an aspect in life that you can improve and make progress on without being willing to have difficult conversations and listening to the other person. And like, to me, like, it's fundamental to having not just a successful business, but like successful relationships in life is the willingness to do that even when it's difficult, right?
Yeah.
And I think there's just so many implications, right? Like, what do you call it? Like the golden rule: treat people the way you would want to be treated, right? Like you said. I heard my coach say this the other day. He's like, the level above that is the platinum rule. And the platinum rule is you learn enough about the other person that you treat them the way they want to be treated, not just the way you want to be treated, right? Because they might have different, preferences to how and when this communication. And what I kind of want to segue into too is another thing I see a lot of. I like, in my head, I think of it like the Twitter effect, which is I'll just send an email about bad news instead of picking up the phone and having a conversation, right? Like, one, that is nowhere near the same thing. And you telling yourself that getting that information to them via email is the same as calling them and owning up to it are not the same. I totally agree that it takes far more energy to do this on the phone because it's scary, because there's an emotional toll to doing the thing that's difficult, because you have to listen to them after you tell them, and you've got to be there and be present and feel that, which is also hard. That I think we've moved so much with trying to streamline logistics that people are optimizing for like, oh, well, I'm just going to work over email. And customers, shippers do this, brokers do this, carriers do this. And this is one of the things that like I try to move back the other way with everybody we work with is like, we need to be talking to everybody, because brokers will treat carriers far poorly when they hide behind emails and there's no personal recourse, right? And the same way people are meaner on Twitter when nobody knows who they are and they don't have to talk to somebody. If you put that person face to face with that other person, 9 times out of 10, they wouldn't say anything close to what they would say behind a computer, because they've got to feel what it's like when that person receives that information. You're just firing it off, letting them deal with it, whatever. Like, to me, that is a coward. Like, and it irritates me more than anything. And again, I'm not arguing the fact that it isn't more work, and in some ways it is more efficient to send emails, but I think most of the industry needs to move more back towards communications, because you can't have a relationship with a carrier as a broker if you're not talking to that person. Like, that's just information going back and forth. That is not a relationship. The same thing with your shippers, and it's the same thing with your employees, right? All of capitalism functions on relationships. Our industry, especially, all the contracts are worth nothing. I don't care if you're Walmart giving a contract to Werner or Schneider. If Walmart doesn't have the freight to move, they can't sue that company. Like, there's no recourse.
Yep.
The only reason those companies work together is because 2 people trust each other, or multiple people trust each other as individuals, right? And we've moved in this way to trying to be more efficient, to do more with less. And I think we create less value. I think we do less actually at the end of the day. And I think both sides suffer. I think if every driver was looking face to face, theoretically, with a broker they worked with, they would treat each other differently. And I think shippers would do the same thing with brokers. And I think across the board, all companies would be improving if they optimized for more conversations and less written communication.
Yeah, I'll take it a step further too. Like, if you have a hard conversation to have or bad news to deliver, and this was taught to me years ago in the Army, was like I had a supervisor or someone that was in charge of me that basically said, "Hey, Cross, if you're going to come to me with bad news or a problem, I need you to also come to me with like a couple possible solutions to it." Right? They might be off the wall, they might be wild, but there's probably going to be 1 or 2 that are like actual, options here. And that, if you translate that to freight, it could be, let's say it's, the issue is let's say a customer, you quoted them and you're not going to be able to get a truck in because the market tightened up, right? Or you misquoted, or whatever the case might be. So you could, you have possible solutions. You could take a loss on it. You could try to delay it. You could try to find other options. But if I just let's just say you're my customer. I'm like, "Hey, Ben, sorry, I can't cover this." And that's it. you're gonna be like, dude, what the hell, man? Like, you committed to me. But if I come into it more like, hey Ben, I know I quoted this to you at $2,000. A lot of things happened out of our control. The market's tightened up. We've had some bad weather. I've got a couple options here I wanted to talk through with you. If it's possible that we can delay this for a day or two, it's very likely we can still get somebody in there at that level. If you're willing to pay a little bit more, we might be able to get some capacity in today as we requested. I'll try to meet you in the middle and take a loss on it myself to try and share that with you. But those two examples right there, right? Those are me coming to you with a problem and a couple of possible solutions, right?
Yes. And I'll add two more to that, because in that conversation, I almost have the same thing over and over again. Because that's the thing that you were saying earlier, right? Like once you start doing this, it gets easier, and then it becomes a habit, and then it's not as scary. And then you kind of already know how you're going to approach it because you've done it so many times, right? So like for me, same two things. Hey, look, man, I know this load that was coming out of whatever, Euclid, Minnesota, heading down to South Florida. Like we were able to cover all of them yesterday for the rate we looked at. You needed two more picked up. There's no trucks up there today. Like we started working on it, and like there's literally not anybody with the equipment you need that can make your pickup time. I took a look at the market. I do think we can deadhead a guy in maybe from a couple 100 miles away. The two things that are going to be an issue is like I would need maybe some flexibility on picking up a little later to get a guy into the market to pick up. And the second is like I'm probably going to be looking at like an extra 400 or 500 on this. Again, I know I quoted it for whatever, $2,000. Do you have any room to be able to help me out on this? Right now, maybe they come back and they go, listen, man, one or two. Sometimes I'll be like, yeah, let me see what I can do. Option two, look, man, you committed to this. We just started working together. I need you to honor that rate. Okay, now I have a decision to make, right? Is me standing up and doing what I said I would do, right, and honoring that commitment worth the value of the whole relationship? All right, maybe I take it in the chin, but now they know what I'm willing to do if I decide to do that. So let's say I do that and I take that loss, right? The next thing I'm usually asking is, hey man, look, like I said, kind of fell out of the norm, took, a $500 loss in this one. Hey, do you have any other loads you might be able to give me to help make up for that loss on this one? Because that question alone has paid off more than any other thing I've asked, because what happens is they didn't have to lose more money on that load is the first thing. Secondly, they learned that I did something for them that hurt me, that cost me pain and money. So the most powerful thing in human nature is reciprocity. If I do something for you and I do something difficult for you, there is an overwhelming ability or likelihood that you will now do something for me. And I'm not asking you to give me more money. I'm just asking you to send a couple other loads over so I could make up the loss on this one because this situation happened. It was outside my control. I'm willing to stand behind it. I'll do what's necessary. I'll even take the loss. Do that and then ask if there's any way they can help you out with some more business to make up for this. 80-90% of the time, they give you more loads. Like I've had customers who are like, hey man, look, I got a couple California to New Jerseys that you should be able to make a decent margin on. Can I send you two of those to make up for the $500 loss? I've ended up with relationships with shippers. We used to call it horse trading. And like, I don't really know the origin of that term. I remember the guy I used to work with used to say that all the time. But he would have loads that were priced too low that he needed to move. And what he would do is like, I got 2 or 3 of these that nobody will take because the rate's too low. Can I give you 5 of these loads that I think are priced better to make up for these? And I worked with that guy for years. At the end of every week, if I averaged out my margin between the losses and the wins, they all ended up kind of right in the middle where they needed to be. And when you have that reciprocal relationship, which is the key word there, right? There's trust. You're both working together to help each other out and to work together towards the common goal. That is the thing I think you don't ever get a chance or a shot at when you're sending emails on rates and just taking orders to move a load and never talking to that person. You don't have feedback. They don't know you. There's no reason for them to use you other than that you had a cheap truck that day. And it is inevitable before another broker or carrier comes along with a cheaper truck and you lose it. There's no longevity to that relationship. You can't build a business around those customers. And it sucks to go to work working on shipments like that, right? Where like you're just constantly trying to fight for a lower rate instead of finding optimal solutions over the long run. Like it's always a give and take in life and in business, but you can't ever get to the give and take without real communication, right?
Yeah. And I think a really good tip here is if you think about the turnover in like traffic managers, a lot of times you get like someone young or fairly inexperienced that you, and again, this is your customer we're talking about here, and they're going to make mistakes, right? So some of the best customer relationships that I've seen are the ones where you're not just getting them a truck and getting them a rate that's going to work for them. You're helping them succeed in their career and really create a dynamic, successful logistics operation within that organization that makes them look good, which helps build trust and rapport between you and them and helps you secure business long term because you're a trusted partner. So things like, and I've seen it depending on the customer, it can vary, but hey guy that works at this, hey traffic manager, like FYI, I realized that this shipment, this is worth $200,000 and you didn't secure any extra insurance on it. You didn't ask me to do it. We didn't find a truck for it. Like this one slid by, but we got to make sure that we're aware of the value of this product, because if there's a claim and it gets denied partially by the insurance company, it's not going to look very good for you, right? It could be that one. I've seen where like the shipping manager like thinks they have the right equipment. Like Open Deck is classic for, it's like notorious for, like they think they asked for the right equipment type, but they didn't. And a flatbed shows up and they realize they don't have enough height on the deck. They needed a low boy or a double drop or something like that. Step deck. I've seen it with the temperature on or the reefer setting in general. I've seen it on almost everything. Like literally, probably every situation. Like a customer can make an error, right? If you can become an extension of that supply chain, like think about with detention, like the way that they operate with scheduling appointments and how they're the flow of their yard for trucks getting in and out, they can be the cause of their own problems. And if you can help identify, get ahead of that, have the hard conversation. Just because they're your customer and they're paying the bills to you doesn't mean you can't go and have a constructive conversation about, hey, here's a couple things that I've noticed, and here's a few ways that I think we can improve upon this to make it better for you guys and ultimately better for everybody. And those are some of the best long-term relationships I've seen.
100%, right? I think Open Deck, I've seen so many of those where like, I got a new customer and they tell you to move this. I run the DIMS and I look at it and I'm like, well, hey,
that's
the length on this doesn't look like this will work on a step deck. I think you maybe need a 53 footer on this, or I think you need this other equipment. Do you want to check on those DIMS real quick to make sure we're sending in the right stuff, right? Just want to make sure you don't end up with an issue with a rejection. Hey, I've worked with that receiver or that shipper before. I'm pretty sure they need a headache rack to load. I think it's one of their PP&E requirements. Can you check real quick before we send this guy in? I want to make sure this guy doesn't get rejected at your vendor, right? Or the simple one, hey, saw this tender come over. The transit times don't look doable to meet this appointment. Do we have the ability to move this? Like, as I'm looking at the mileage and I don't think we can get a solo to make this pickup and delivery. Do you want me to look at a team or do we want to look at another option, right? Like, hey, reefer temp. I'm pretty sure when every time we've moved this commodity, like this says this is fresh and you're asking me on the tender to set it at 25, like we don't want to freeze this, do we? Do we want to double check this again? These are the things that brokers add value to their shipper beyond just providing a truck, right? And again, one, you need to have conversations to be able to do this. Second, you need to be able to ask questions and be comfortable doing that to provide that value. And you don't need to come across like confrontational. Like these are why shippers work with a certain number of brokers for as long as they can, and why they don't want to switch them out, because it also takes some time for their brokers to understand the nuances of their customers, their receivers, their pickups, their warehouses, right? These things are so valuable back to a shipper that's why they want to work with brokers, right? In a lot of scenarios. I mean, I could list a dozen of these in the tanker side that I've learned in the past year where I'm like, I know that shipper can't load that truck. Full stop. I'm like, and I know what the issue is, and I know what you do need, and I know what requirements and inspections you need on the tanker, and I also know the issues that you'll run into when you're trying to secure this. Being able to have those conversations, again, makes that person's life easier, and two, makes them look better. Because now when they go to the purchasing manager and go, hey, look, I know we said this, but like, can you take a look at this? They're not going to say our broker pointed this out. They're going to be like, hey, look what I noticed. Hey, they get a pat on the back. You're making them look better. Like, these are the intangibles that I think get missed when we treat the whole industry transactionally and try to move to this place where every load's exactly the same and every piece of equipment and driver is exactly the same and are all interchangeable, which to me is, again, why those things don't function that way in the first place.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the last thing I'll put here too is like there is a time and a place to sugarcoat something. No, let me rephrase that. There is a difference between softening a blow and sugarcoating something,
Yes.
right? And there's a time and a place to soften a blow versus just being direct. So like sugarcoating, I wouldn't recommend. Like if you know full stop a truck is going to be late, don't approach your customer and be like, yeah, you know, I think he's probably going to be on time. We're not sure. You know, there's a chance there might be delay. If you know he's going to be like, hey, the driver is going to be 4 hours late, right? You can soften the blow and be like, you know, here's what happened. Here's what we're going to do about it. But the driver's going to be late. But don't like dance around it or like skirt the edges and sugarcoat it. Like if you can just be direct and move on to the next step to make this situation better or, you know, get past the hard part, it's going to just do everybody good in the long run. Because if I have bad news coming towards me and somebody sugarcoats it and doesn't tell me how bad it really is, and then I find out after the fact that they knew and they didn't tell me and I had no heads up to try and prepare for it, I'm going to be pissed at that person. So
any scenario. Let your buddy borrow your car. Hey man, I think there's a little scratch on it. Must have been a shopping cart. No worries. And then you get home and you're like, my fender's hanging off the car. Like, what in the world? Like, it does not make you feel better that somebody led you to believe something wasn't as bad as it was.
For sure. So, well, good conversation. Anything else on, I know we talked on like the conversations with customers. Oh, one last thing too I want to add in. When you're building relationships with your carriers, or even the first time you talk to them, if you know how important something is for this shipment, it's really important that you communicate with your driver or dispatcher and say something like, hey, you know, if you guys are going to run into any issues or delays or if there's a breakdown, please let me know ASAP, right? I'm not going to be mad about it. We'll work through it. But the sooner you let me know, the faster we can work through it together to find a solution here, right? And we've all had that driver that like just dodges your calls. They'll send you a text update, but they won't actually answer your phone call. I had one where literally they're like, oh yeah, we're at this truck stop, and it happened to be like 30 minutes from me, and I drove down there because I couldn't get an update, and they weren't there, and I'm like, you lied. Like, had you just told me that you were 3 hours delayed, I could have let the customer know, because now they're having the whole board's getting together, having a meeting in the conference room, trying to figure out this shipment, and I can't give them updates because you're not telling me. So yeah, you know, request that same communication both ways. Remember, this is business, and the human being behind it isn't necessarily a bad person. Things can happen. It's how you deal with it that really matters.
The thing I would add to that is I think the thing that helps get carriers to be more willing to is to tell them the same thing we just talked about in this episode. Like, the thing I will always say drivers when I'm talking to them is like, hey man, look, if you are running behind or you do have an issue, please don't hesitate to let me know. I am not going to get upset. I'm not going to get angry or yell. Like, I know shit happens, but again, if I can let my shipper know, I can rearrange things and let them know. I know you're expecting to get unloaded in an hour, but hey, if they're running slow and they can't get you unloaded and you don't think you'll make the appointment, just give me a heads up. Again, I know that's not on you, but the sooner I know, the sooner I can make your life easier when you get there to load, right? Reassuring them that you won't be upset if things don't go as planned makes them less hesitant to actually communicate with you when you need it. Yep. Because they've dealt with brokers that have screamed at them, yelled at them, and told them they're going to deduct money from their rate cons because the guy was late, so they start to get more hesitant to talk to any broker. You've got to bridge that gap and go over that and have that conversation before you need it to make sure they're comfortable to let you know when things aren't going the way they're supposed to.
Precisely. Good stuff, man. Good episode. Yeah, have the hard conversation. You know, it gets easier every second after you start that the bad news. So, and it'll help you grow too. You know what I mean? Like I
Yes.
truly think that you're going to be a transactional broker if you're afraid to have these conversations. The ones that truly can have, you know, you can celebrate the wins together. You can talk about the bad things together. Those are your true value add relationships. They're going to take you the distance and go very, very far versus That one didn't work out. I guess I'm on to the next customer. So, good stuff. Any final thoughts?
Whether you believe you can or believe you can't, you're right.
And until next time, go Bills.
That wraps up this episode of Freight 360. Check out the show notes for links to anything that we've referenced on this episode. And make sure to visit us online at freight360.net to see our entire library of episodes, videos, blogs, and more.
And make sure to check us out on Facebook and subscribe to our YouTube channel for daily and weekly tips and content. And if you'd like your question answered on the show, fill out the Contact Us form on our site, and we'll see you next week.